Welcome everyone, this is Honest Restart, and it appears we are finally reaching the end of this long and twisty and unpredictable roller coaster that is the entire debate and speculation on the release date to the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So why are we finally coming to an end, potentially? Because today, Nintendo finally officially confirmed that we will be getting a Nintendo Direct and Treehouse footage for Nintendo's E3. We'll be getting it at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, 12 noon Eastern Time on June 15th. We'll be getting about 40 minutes of footage focused exclusively on Nintendo Switch software, mostly releasing in 2021, followed by 3 hours of Treehouse gameplay. That is what's going to be happening then, and a lot of us, myself included, strongly believe Breath of the Wild 2 will be at this show, and it will be one of the biggest, if not the biggest things to be there. And surely, if it is going to be getting a focus in a Nintendo Direct, we will likely be getting some sort of release date update on the game. If we don't get a release date update on the game during the Direct, then I would say that would hard confirm Breath of the Wild 2 for 2022. But there's also the chance we get the opposite. We do get a release date update, and it tells us approximately when the game is coming out. So this is when I believe the roller coaster will finally be ending. But for this video, we're going to be talking about everything. Kind of talking about how it all started with the speculation when the game was first sort of shown off to us, and everything that's gone on between then and now, and where I sort of sit in terms of when I actually think it's going to come out. Now again, keep in mind this will be my prediction, but I also want to point out that months ago, I scheduled just one day in this E3 week to have off from work. Wanna know what day that was? June 15th. In other words, I'm totally flexing right now, and I feel really good about my predictive powers. Could be wrong, because I get things wrong a lot, but I also get things right as well, so we'll see what happens here. But anyway, that's what we're focusing on today. This entire roller coaster ride for the big debate regarding Breath of the Wild 2's release date. Now before we jump into things, let me very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It's linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe. So please forgive me if the editing for this video is a bit more on the simpler side. I have a lot of things going on. There's been so much going on, not just with my personal life and work and stuff, but just in terms of the news and the build-up to E3. There's been so much going on, so much changing, which sort of kind of builds my point here, the entire point of the video, this entire roller coaster ride for Breath of the Wild 2. But let's get to the beginning. So the beginning is Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild was amazing. It came out March 2017. It was an incredible game. It's gotten more Game of the Year awards than pretty much any game ever. It's the best-selling Zelda game by far. I think right now the game is at around 23 million copies sold or more, and growing at least. It's a huge, huge thing. And we got DLC throughout 2017. But towards the end of 2017, we got confirmation that Nintendo and the Zelda team were already hard at work on the next big Zelda game. Then fast forward to about a year and a half later, E3 2019. It was a very jam-packed Nintendo Direct. The second half of 2019 was one of the best periods for the Nintendo Switch overall. There was tons of content to play during that time. The only other time that I would say would be better was the first year for Nintendo Switch 2017. In other words, there wasn't really a need for Nintendo to show off even more at the end here. When they had that final second Smash DLC character reveal for Banjo-Kazooie, I already lost my voice in terms of screaming and delight and joy. It was just, there was so much going on. Had they ended the Direct there, no one would have batted an eye. Everyone would have thought that would have been a fine Nintendo Direct. Yet, Nintendo decided to show us one more thing. And that one more thing was confirmation or reconfirmation that the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was in development. Now what was amazing about this is that it showed us that it wasn't just the next Zelda game, but rather a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, which was very exciting given all the success of Breath of the Wild and us being able to learn more about this world and the story and what's going on there. But we even saw what appeared to be quite an extensive story trailer. We saw the resurrection of Ganondorf and things going on there, Zelda and Link exploring the world under Hyrule. It seems some time has passed. there's some things going on here. And typically when it comes to story for Zelda games, that is done later into development. So the fact that they were showing us some significant story elements here suggests that at this point, back at E3 2019, they were already far enough into the game, they had a decent enough structure of what they were doing that they could already start putting together an actual story here. Because that's what the Zelda team usually does. They focus on gameplay and ideas first, and then they build a story around that. And then on top of that, this again was using the Breath of the Wild engine, or an upgrade of that. It's using Breath of the Wild as a foundation, and in interviews we saw that Aonuma, the Zelda director, told us that this was returning to Hyrule. A return to Hyrule means that, well, they can use a lot of the land that they made in the initial game. In other words, all of these things are suggesting the game was very, very far along. At the time, and again, this is kind of me putting out that I don't get everything right, but at the time, when I saw that trailer, I thought, oh, we're getting a trailer now at E3 2019 for this when we didn't need it. I thought that we would be seeing Breath of the Wild 2 for holiday 2020. That did not happen. Which brings me to 2020. 2020 was a very different year, a unique year. There was no E3 last year. There was a very small amount of actual published Nintendo games that came out in 2020, and of those published Nintendo games, even fewer were internally developed games. It was not the best year for most companies as a whole, not just Nintendo. Not to say that there weren't some good things in 2020, but overall, compared to other years, it was definitely lackluster. And it makes sense because we were going through a pandemic. It was something that was unprecedented, and that's what led to all the delays and the slow times in terms of actual software coming out. So understandably, if Breath of the Wild 2 was hypothetically meant for a holiday 2020 release, it wouldn't have made it because of COVID. That's understandable. But also, at the point we are already at, it does make me wonder, were they even potentially ready for that time, holiday 2020? Given that we haven't seen the game yet, it's hard to say for sure, but by the end of this video, I think maybe some of these things will start to make a little bit more sense. Now, we did get something Zelda in 2020. It was Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, a third-party game made by Koei Tecmo. The Zelda team had a hand in it. They oversaw some things because it was taking elements from Breath of the Wild, but it was a third-party game, and it was a Warriors game, a Musou game. Fun thing, got to see some nice, awesome content related to Breath of the Wild or the Breath of the Wild universe, but it wasn't Breath of the Wild itself or the sequel. It felt like Nintendo had that there so they could have some form of Zelda content, major Zelda content for the year, because it does seem like Nintendo wants to have some form of major Zelda content every single year. But now let's talk about this year, 2021, the 35th anniversary of The Legend of Zelda. Technically, it's in February. It already passed. We didn't get a lot of major news during that time, not in the same way Nintendo celebrated Mario's 35th anniversary. However, if you look throughout history, when Nintendo has celebrated the anniversary of Zelda, it's usually towards the end of the year with a big major release. So even though we didn't get like a Zelda-focused Direct back in February, the hope is that we at least get some sort of Zelda anniversary stuff towards the latter half of the year, maybe a big major release like Breath of the Wild 2, maybe. By this point, that was my prediction. However, a lot of people's minds started changing on the possibility of Breath of the Wild 2 even coming out for holiday 2021 because of the February Nintendo Direct. Now, in the February Nintendo Direct, while they didn't specifically mention the Zelda 35th anniversary, there were some Zelda-related things. There was the Age of Calamity DLC, there was Skyward Sword. They actually confirmed Skyward Sword HD to come out this July, a long-rumored game. They announced some new Skyward Sword Joy-Cons, and they told us that they would be trying to get an event with Breath of the Wild 2 details later this year. That was the most Zelda news we got in a single sort of presentation in a very long time, and this was around the actual anniversary for Zelda. To me, it said or suggested that yes, Nintendo has plans for the anniversary later this year, but they're not ready to fully unveil what those are. But other people interpreted a few different things. They saw Skyward Sword and they thought, oh, that's the big Zelda game. It's surely bigger than Age of Calamity, and that was a big Zelda game for last year, so that means we are not getting Breath of the Wild 2 this year. COVID was a thing, it just doesn't seem realistic at all. And when you look at the discussion and speculation that's gone on between different people, a lot of people who are insiders a lot have suggested that it doesn't seem likely. However, I think it's also worth noting that no one has come out outright and said that it is absolutely not happening from inside sources they've heard themselves that I would consider to be legitimate, like Emily Rogers or Jeff Grubb or Nate the Hate, all people who have shown to have very good inside information. None of them has said for sure that the game's not coming out this year. They simply expressed doubt, although Jeff Grubb has said on multiple occasions that it could still happen. Which is interesting because moving past February, there were a few other things that came up, which brings me to the Zippo leak. So Zippo is someone we've talked about on the channel multiple times over the last couple years, and basically it's because every time we've gotten inside information from a couple different places publicly, like through Reset Era and stuff from people that we trust, Zippo has also said similar things. So Zippo's been sort of tied to a lot of these sort of rumors that we believe to be true for quite some time. But now there's a lot more scrutiny upon this person because now people are starting to think that maybe this person hasn't had legitimate information. They've gotten banned again from Reset Era, apparently because they couldn't verify their sources, something along those lines. But basically, there is this big blog post that Zippo put out saying a whole bunch of things like there being a Mario Kart coming out really soon, even though some sources have suggested otherwise, that there would be a new 2D Metroid and a new 2D Donkey Kong, which again, there are a whole bunch of other sources suggesting that as well. I've heard similar things. But also that Breath of the Wild 2 just isn't coming out for this year. Now, when this happened, it was certainly a blow, because at this point, before the Zippo leak, I still believed that Breath of the Wild 2 would be a holiday 2021 release. I felt like things were still lining up for that. But with this Zippo leak, before the different things that have happened, I was thinking, oh, this person has inside information. There's a good chance that they know what they're talking about here, and it's just not happening. However, some time passed and we discovered a few things. Zippo was banned from Reset Era, and a few other things were said. For example, there was this interesting tweet by Jeff Grubb where he showed this little meme showing Breath of the Wild 2 following up on Horizon with some DC characters, which was kind of funny. And it may have just been a joke, but it gave some people hope that perhaps he was teasing something here. So in case you don't understand, let me explain the context here. Horizon Zero Dawn came out back in February 2017, Breath of the Wild came out March 2017, and Breath of the Wild greatly overshadowed Horizon Zero Dawn, even though Horizon Zero Dawn is an incredible open world game from Sony. So with this tweet from Jeff Grubb, it's alluding to how the initial Breath of the Wild overshadowed Horizon Zero Dawn, but it's also perhaps hinting that we could be seeing a similar situation where Breath of the Wild 2 might be following up Horizon Forbidden West, and it could be a similar thing where Breath of the Wild 2 overshadows Horizon Forbidden West. Which brings us to the recent state of play showing off a gameplay demonstration of Horizon Forbidden West. Beautiful gameplay for the game, but there was one thing that was kind of missing. A confirmed release date, even though for a while the game has been slated for 2021. A lot of people are starting to gain more doubt that it's not happening for 2021, even though it hasn't been officially delayed. But with this recent gameplay demonstration, them not actually confirming a hard release date or a more precise window is getting people to be greatly skeptical. However, there's been a lot of speculation that the reason they didn't show a release date had nothing to do with necessarily the game not making it out this year, but more to do with Sony sort of just not wanting to give a concrete date because of all the different things that have been going on within the industry. And Jeff Grubb has sort of supported this idea as well. And what's funny, Nintendo hasn't told us anything about Breath of the Wild 2 yet, and by this point Nintendo had not even announced their E3 plans. So perhaps there's something going on here, and perhaps Sony's waiting on Nintendo to confirm when Breath of the Wild 2 is coming out, so Sony can more appropriately position Horizon Forbidden West so it's not overshadowed again. But that still doesn't tell us clearly when either of these games coming out. Perhaps both these games are coming out to end the fiscal year. Maybe that's a possibility. Maybe it's another situation where Horizon Forbidden West comes out in February and Breath of the Wild 2 comes out in March. It could very well be a very, very similar situation. Something else that should probably be considered though is that the new God of War has recently been pushed to 2022. So with that big game from Sony coming out next year, where are they going to place Horizon Forbidden West? Maybe they want to save that for a holiday 2021 release. We're not sure yet, but it's just something else to consider. Now I'll tell you from what I've personally heard, expecting an early 2022 release for Breath of the Wild 2 is not a crazy expectation at all. It's very reasonable. But at the same time, it's been suggested that it's not out of the question for Breath of the Wild 2 to come out this year. Now, by this point, shortly before E3, surely Nintendo already knows, but it's not public information yet. But I guess the hope here is that, yes, at least at one point in this year, it was still possible for the game to make it out by the holiday. However, not too long ago, we had a particular day with massive amounts of information. So I believe it was last Thursday. Last Thursday, we got release date confirmation for Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl for November 19th and Pokemon Legends Arceus for January 28th. Now this is very interesting because it has Pokemon positioned as a November release. Excluding Breath of the Wild, most 3D Zelda games come out in November. So this does perhaps have some potentially daunting news of when Breath of the Wild 2 comes out. But then also when you take a look at Legends Arceus, it coming out in January means it's not coming out in March, which has been the big sort of time period that people have been predicting for Breath of the Wild 2. Now myself personally, leading up to the confirmation of these release dates, I've always felt that when they told us early 2022 for Legends Arceus, that suggested that it would be the big fiscal year ending game. So because of that, I felt like Breath of the Wild 2 would not be coming out for March 2022. But with Legends Arceus coming out late January, it definitely leaves enough room for a major game from Nintendo to come out for March 2022, and maybe it could be Breath of the Wild 2. However, I had an inkling of an idea, pun intended here. What if Splatoon 3 comes out to close out the fiscal year? It is the kind of game that could push massive sales. Perhaps Splatoon 3 could be it. They did show it off back in the February Nintendo Direct, which I felt was a very early off reveal for this game. There was so much they showed off. It looked like they showed us some customization options, actual demonstration of a little bit of the single player mode. They showed us the hub world, they showed us multiplayer battles and such. A lot of this felt like a lot to show off so early on, if assuming the game is coming out sometime in 2022, unless the game is an early 2022 release. So then I asked our very well-known potential leaker, Samus Hunter. A lot of people have doubt that this person is an actual leaker, but if you just take a look at their pinned tweet and all of the different things that they've said, and that's not even everything, a lot of it has come to fruition, or most of it. It's a really, really strong track record. I would say that just basing this off of compared to other people and what they've predicted, even if when they have inside information, Samus Hunter has been far more reliable. So even if it's the case that Samus Hunter isn't a true leaker, which I'm not saying they are or not, they've shown to have at least a pretty good sort of track record in terms of suggesting things that will eventually be happening from Nintendo. So anyway, I had a discussion with Samus Hunter on this day of the Pokemon release date confirmations, and I asked her about Splatoon 3. And she told me that assuming there aren't any major delays, Splatoon 3 could very well come out to close out the fiscal year. And we had a bit of a discussion on how it sort of made sense because, well, one, they showed it off so early on, and that Nintendo doesn't like to delay things past their fiscal years. So if Splatoon 3 was revealed back in February of 2021, it coming out for March 2022 is not at all an unreasonable expectation. And to me, this was a bit of a bombshell because I gotta be frank, I did sort of expect perhaps maybe a summer release for Splatoon 3 next year, not a March release for Splatoon 3. But if this ends up being the case, and it does seem kind of reasonable considering how early on the game was shown off, then when do we see Breath of the Wild 2? If Legends Arceus is coming out in January and Splatoon 3 is coming out in March, I really doubt Nintendo would put Breath of the Wild 2 in February. That doesn't seem like a realistic, likely good place to put the game, especially considering Legends Arceus is coming out late January, and it's a very Breath of the Wild inspired game. So if both of these things are the case, maybe Breath of the Wild 2 is either A, not coming out in 2021 at all and it's coming out late into 2022, or it is coming out in the latter half of 2021 and it's just not a part of the final months of the fiscal year, which would be January through March of 2022. At this point, most people were under the belief that Breath of the Wild 2 would not be coming out in 2021. I myself still had some hope. I still do. I'm still predicting it to come out for 2021, and I feel like this is a good time to mention for the umpteenth time, I placed a gamble a while ago that a Nintendo Switch revision with 4K capabilities and Breath of the Wild 2 will come out close to each other, if not on the same day of each other, before the end of the year, in 2021. That was my hard prediction gamble, and if I'm wrong about it, there will be a price to pay. The price? Well, I've decided officially that I will have to eat dubious food. Have you seen that pixelated food that you get in Breath of the Wild when you mess up a cook? Well, I'll eat something like that in real life, and it will be recorded for you all to see if it ends up being the case that Breath of the Wild 2 does not make it out for this year. By doing this prediction, I feel like it makes things more interesting. It definitely increases the stakes for me in terms of my prediction and makes me more worried about being wrong, but it also makes things kind of fun. But on the note of the prediction of a 4K Switch revision and Breath of the Wild 2 coming out for 2021, let's talk about the reports of the 4K Switch revision coming out this year. So towards the end of the day, after the Pokemon release dates thing and after I had this discussion about Splatoon 3 with Samus Hunter, we got this report from Bloomberg that a 4K Switch revision, we'll call it Switch Pro for now, even though I feel like the name's probably gonna be something different, is coming out in either September or October. This is huge for the whole roller coaster situation here, because a lot of speculation has been sort of for Breath of the Wild 2 to come out alongside the Switch Pro. Why? Because Breath of the Wild 2 is likely Nintendo's best looking, most impressive game, and to have a more powerful Switch revision to run it so it can push Zelda to greater heights, perhaps in 4K, perhaps 60 frames per second, that will be a great way to showcase both products. Breath of the Wild 2 can showcase the power of the Switch revision, and the Switch revision can showcase Breath of the Wild 2 in its best possible light. And when you look throughout history of Nintendo hardware releases, they typically pair Zelda with those hardware releases. Let's go back to the most recent major release from Nintendo, the Nintendo Switch Lite. On the exact same day that game came out in September of 2019, we got Link's Awakening Remake. Let's go further back. When we got the Nintendo Switch itself back in March of 2017, we also got Breath of the Wild. But let's now go further back. I believe February 2015, when we got the new Nintendo 3DS, well, I know it came out the same day, Majora's Mask 3D, another new Zelda game. But let's go even further back. Back with the Nintendo Wii, we got the release for Twilight Princess as a launch title for that system, but also to push more Wii Motion Pluses, they had it packaged with Skyward Sword later into the lifetime of the Nintendo Wii. I feel like I've made my point. There is a clear pattern of Nintendo using Zelda to push hardware. Some people may counter this argument by saying that Nintendo doesn't always use Zelda to push their hardware. This is true, the most recent example being the Wii U, and look what happened. It completely flopped. So it absolutely makes sense for Breath of the Wild 2 to come out alongside this Switch revision. Now, a lot of people have been speculating that because it's going to be a staggered release apparently, because we've seen some information suggesting that the Switch Pro won't come out until November, that maybe they won't do that. Maybe it'll be more of like a soft launch for the Switch Pro and Breath of the Wild 2 will come out later. I guess that's a possibility, but honestly, I don't really buy it. That's not what I believe. I feel like it makes the most sense for Breath of the Wild 2 to come out alongside the Switch revision this year. However, I don't think September is going to be the time. They gave us a window of September to October, so I'm going to expect the very latest, October, but not just the beginning of October or mid-October, but the very end of October, to give Nintendo and the Zelda team and the hardware manufacturers as much time as possible to actually make this incredible outcome as reasonable as possible. So my prediction is that on a Friday, which is when we usually see releases from Nintendo, October 29th of 2021, we will see the release for the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, a couple days before Halloween, which is interesting because Breath of the Wild 2 will supposedly be one of the darkest Zelda games ever made, but also we'll get the Switch revision around this time as well, if not on the exact same day, so they can push each other, and this will be just a few weeks away from Black Friday, and still about 3 weeks removed from the release for Pokemon Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, that it will all work out and it'll make sense in terms of Nintendo's sort of plan here to close out holiday 2021. That's what I think is happening. I think there's a legitimate chance we could see Breath of the Wild 2 and the Switch Pro to come out late October, and then in January we get Legends Arceus, and then in March we get Splatoon 3. That's what I'm sort of predicting right now, and of course, I could totally be wrong. But based off all the things I've talked about throughout this video, it's been sort of up and down in terms of the information suggesting it could make it out, it can't make it out for this year, and I feel like at E3, that will be the date that Eiji Numa was alluding to back in the February Direct, where he said we'd be getting more details on the game. And it'll be a full blowout for Breath of the Wild 2. We'll finally know what's going on with this game, and they'll give us the release date, hopefully. And we'll know. The roller coaster will finally be over. And if it doesn't come out this year, again, that's fine. I am expecting Nintendo to have some good quality stuff for us to play throughout the year, going into 2022. And I may have this video of me eating dubious food if it doesn't happen. So either way, I feel like it's a win-win for some people because there's enjoyment on both sides of the spectrum here. But we shall see what happens. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On This Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.